Let's go live to the Shadow Assistant Minister for Home Ownership, Andrew Bragg. Andrew Bragg, you're someone who is very much forward-leaning when it comes to creative housing policy. What are your thoughts when it comes to negative gearing and capital gains tax? Is there any room for reining those in, as Joe Hockey once argued in the Parliament as he left the Parliament in his valedictory?
Well, the last thing we need is more taxes on housing, Kieran, because about half the cost of a new house in New South Wales goes in taxes and regulatory costs. So the last thing we need is more taxes. That would only result in shocking the supply side of the market and there being fewer houses for people to live in.
Would that be the case even if it were grandfathered and only applicable to people with 3 or more negatively geared properties?
I think the spectre of the government giving up on policies that can promote supply and tilt the scales in favour of first homeowners is very depressing. And so even if you went for a modification like that, it would still chill the market and send a message that the government's only solution here is more and more tax.
Do you take some comfort in the fact that the Prime Minister's saying that this is not something he's been convinced of and it's not part of the government's policy as we speak?
Not at all. I mean, the Prime Minister seems to be unable to completely rule this out altogether. And this is exactly the same show we saw with the stage 3 tax cuts and also on superannuation tax. So the government has a very bad record here on taxation. But also, Kieran, they have a terrible record on housing. I mean, the fact is that they have almost killed the Australian dream over the last couple of years by presiding over a massive collapse in housing construction, whilst also letting in over 1 million people in the past couple of years. So they have set fire to the housing market in Australia, and their only solution apparently is to impose more taxes. So it's pretty depressing.
Yeah. You're talking about more super being accessed for first home buyers. Can you tell us where that policy is at? When is the detail going to be finalised?
We have 2 policies that we've announced so far in relation to housing. One restricts foreign demand for Australian housing, and another is a policy around allowing people to access $50,000 of their super. That is still being looked at. There will be other policies that will be announced before the election on housing. But both of those 2 policies, on migration and on super, would have more effect.
But on the super, you're going to bump that up, aren't you, that figure?
Well, look, it's under review because clearly since it was announced almost 3 years ago, Labor has presided over a heavily inflationary environment and the house prices have continued to go up. So that threshold has been eroded in a real sense. So it's being looked at. But both of those policies on super and on foreign ownership of Australian housing would have more of an immediate impact than all of Labor's policies from the last 2.5 years combined on housing.
Do you think, just on a separate but related matter, that we will see a rate cut before the election?
Well, that all depends on core inflation. If that can get back into the band, then it's possible. But at the moment, it's still 400 basis points out of the, 40 basis points out of the target band for the RBA. So ultimately, the government can cut spending and they can help the Reserve Bank try and do their job. But unfortunately, the government has been doing everything it can to spend more money and it's made the central bank's job so much harder.
We haven't hit recession, though, and as Andrew Charlton put it to me about half an hour ago, Angus Taylor and others are saying that other nations are cutting their rates and much more quickly than Australia, but we have not been in recession and the unemployment rate remains near record lows.
Well, that may be the case, but ultimately it's anemic growth. We're growing at under 1% annually, and that is not good, and that's why small businesses and others are doing it tough. So what we want to see is more growth, but we want to see that happen in a more sustainable way. And at the moment, the country basically has been run on foreign or inbound migration and then public sector spending. So what we want to see is the private economy back in action and creating more jobs.
Shadow Assistant Minister for Home Ownership, Andrew Bragg. Thanks. Appreciate it.